Today we are going to be reacting to a video called The Most Epic Survival Stories in History.
Today we're going over the most epic survival stories in history. Poon Lim. It's November 23rd, 1942, and 24-year-old Poon Lim
who would ever name theirself Poon Lim
is desperately clinging to a wooden plank in the vast emptiness of the Atlantic Ocean. Just moments earlier, he had been a steward aboard the SS Ben Lomond, a British merchant marine ship on its way to New York. Without warning, two massive explosions ripped through the vessel, and Lim was swept overboard. Fighting against the pull of the now sinking ship, he frantically swam toward what he hoped was the surface, his lungs burning for air. When he finally broke through, he looked around only to see the endless ocean stretching in every direction. He was completely alone. As he bobbed in the frigid water, trying to make sense of the nightmare unfolding around him, the German U-boat that had fired the torpedo suddenly surfaced. Its crew climbed onto the deck, and Poon Lim waved frantically, shouting for help. The Germans spotted him and burst into laughter.
The guy is drowning and these stupid idiots are laughing at him.
They mockingly waved back before again disappearing beneath the waves, leaving him to die. After 2 agonizing hours of drifting, Lim spotted a sign of hope. One of the few life rafts the crew of Ben Lomond had managed to launch before the ship went down was floating just a few hundred feet away. He desperately swims toward it and drags himself aboard. In the distance, he sees another raft carrying a handful of other survivors, and they begin waving for him to join them. But with no oars to steer, the raft slowly drifted apart until once again, he was completely alone.
I wonder if they survived.
Aboard the raft, Lim finds some food, water, and signaling supplies. He began rationing carefully, clinging to hope that rescue would come soon, but days stretched into weeks, and his supplies dwindled to nothing. Realizing he would probably run out of food before he was rescued at this rate, Lim made a desperate decision. He would save his last piece of hardtack not to eat, but to use as bait. He fashioned a fishing hook from the spring in his flashlight and unraveled hemp rope for a fishing line. Surprisingly, the fish seemed to like the hardtack more than the sailors ever did, but his hook was too small to catch anything substantial. Using a nail he pried from the raft, he made a bigger hook and used the small fish he had been able to catch as bait.
Bro is smarter than me at this point.
As his fresh water supply ran out, he rigged a canvas shelter to catch rainwater to drink. When seagulls began landing on his raft, Lim caught them for food as well. With no way to cook the birds, he butchered them, soaked the meat in seawater, and dried it into jerky under the scorching sun. Though the supplies he found on the raft had completely run out, he was now catching enough food to survive. But then the rain stopped completely, and soon he was left with nothing to drink. Sunburned and delirious with thirst, he watched as sharks began circling his raft. In this moment, Lim comes up with an idea only a man staring at death could come up with. Using seagull remains as bait, he tries to catch one of the sharks. He gets a bite and he uses all of his strength to pull the giant fish out of the water. Desperate beyond reason, he cuts it open and drinks the blood from its liver.
I wonder if it contains some sort of disease, and if you know, comment down below.
A few days later, a cargo ship appears and Lim shouts to them in English, begging them to save him. But they ignore his request, the crew assuming he was a Japanese sailor. Later, American Navy patrol planes spot him and drop to buoy to mark his location for rescue.
This is why the US comes in clutch.
But before they could return, a violent storm swept Lim and his raft away into the vast ocean.
Oh, never mind.
Months pass, and Poon Lim gives up counting the days he has been lost at sea. Starving and sunburned, he's about to give up. But one morning, while gazing out at the water, he noticed something different. The color of the ocean had changed. He had drifted closer to shore. But where was he? And more crucially, could he survive long enough to be found? Finally, on April 5th, 1943, 4 months after the Ben Lomond's sinking, a Brazilian fishing boat spotted him just 9 miles off the coast of northern Brazil. Using the last of his strength, he stands and shouts for help, and the fishermen come to his rescue. By this point, Lim had lost 20 pounds.
Losing 20 pounds is crazy. Not like Queso would ever lose 20 pounds in his life.
And was so weak, the fishermen had to lift his emaciated body from the raft into their boat. In a Brazilian hospital, Lim learned he was the sole survivor from his ship. He had survived for 133 days, drifting alone in the Atlantic Ocean. Poon Lim makes a full recovery and is later told that no one had ever survived longer on a raft at sea. He quickly replied, "I hope no one will ever have to break that record." Hugh Glass. It's August 1823, and a fur trapper named Hugh Glass is traveling along the Grand River in what is now modern-day South Dakota. This particular expedition was deep into Arikara Indian Territory, which made it particularly dangerous, but soon Hugh would be fighting for his life against something much more fierce. While scouting ahead of his party for river crossings, Hugh inadvertently stumbles upon a mother grizzly bear with her cubs. The mama bear, on instinct to protect her young, lunges at Hugh and instantly begins to maul him. The bear tears deep gashes on his back and chest, exposing his ribs, breaks his leg, and slices his throat. The other trappers hear his screams and come running, finding Hugh being literally torn apart. They open fire, finally bringing down the beast. Hugh lies in a pool of his own blood.
Bro got attacked so hard, surely he is dead, right?
A mangled wreck that barely resembles a human being. Everyone present knows they're looking at a dead man walking. Or, rather, a dead man that had just been crumpled into a pretzel, I guess. They fashion a makeshift stretcher and drag him along for 2 days, but his weight slows their progress to a crawl through dangerous territory. Expecting Glass to die at any moment, the expedition leader offers $80 for volunteers to stay with him until the end and give him a proper burial. An old trapper named John Fitzgerald and a young man named Jim Bridger step forward, thinking they've just scored the easiest money of their lives. But days pass, and Hugh Glass refuses to die. Fitzgerald and Bridger watch as Hugh drifts in and out of consciousness. Each time they think he's gone, he lets out another painful groan. Poor old Hugh. It won't be long now.
Imagine hearing that voice more than 3 days straight. Those two dudes are like, just die already.
Yep, any minute. Oh my god, just fucking die already. 5 days pass and Hugh is still not dead. The trappers begin to panic. What if the Indians find them? They'd be sitting ducks. Hugh is obviously not going to make it, and there's no reason for him to take them with him. So in a moment of cold calculation, they decide to take Hugh's rifle, knife, and supplies and abandon him alone in the wilderness. Fitzgerald and Bridger quickly catch up with the main expedition and report that Hugh Glass had passed away. The other men accept this without question. After all, they'd seen what the guy looked like when they left. But against all odds, Hugh Glass did not die.
Bro, how?
And he finally wakes up only to find himself all alone and stripped of all his weapons and supplies. Enraged that Fitzgerald and Bridger had left him to die, he tries to stand but discovers his shattered leg won't support him and his entire body is covered with deep wounds. With grim determination, he sets his own broken leg and begins an impossible 200-mile journey toward Fort Kiowa, crawling on his belly like a broken animal. Every day he drags himself a few agonizing miles, eating berries, roots, bark, and bugs to survive. Maggots hatch from fly eggs in his festering wounds and begin devouring the rotting flesh on his back, which is super gross, but actually probably saved his life by preventing a deadlier infection that would have killed him. While any sane man would have surrendered to death, Hugh is driven by one burning obsession: revenge against the men who betrayed him, so he continues to drag himself along the river. But by this point, Hugh was starving. The berries and bugs he had been eating were not enough. He discovers a pack of wolves feasting on a freshly killed buffalo calf. When the wolves leave, he crawls to the carcass.
How did the wolves did not see him?
And claims it as his own, setting up camp and gorging himself on meat until his leg heals enough for him to limp onwards. Hugh reaches the Missouri River, and there, some friendly Lakota Indians give him a boat which he uses to float downstream. Finally, in October of 1823, Hugh Glass limped into Fort Kiowa. Against all odds, he had survived not only a vicious grizzly bear attack that should have killed him, but also a 6-week, 200-mile journey back through the wilderness, all alone. Now, for most people, surviving such an ordeal would probably be the end of their life on the frontier. But Hugh Glass couldn't forget the men who had left him to die. He wanted revenge, so as soon as he fully recovered, he bought a new rifle and supplies and set out to hunt down Fitzgerald and Bridger. For months, Hugh tracked through the wilderness, following the trail of the expedition that had written him off as dead. And on New Year's Eve, 1823, he walked into Fort Henry and found his former companions. The trappers stared in absolute terror as they watched a man who they thought was dead walk directly towards them. Once they
Yo! What is the guy behind him doing to him?
confirmed he wasn't a ghost that was trying to haunt them, they peppered Hugh with questions, which he answered patiently. Finally, it was his turn to speak, and Hugh just had one question of his own. Where are Fitzgerald and Bridger? Bridger is called, and the young man cannot believe his eyes. Though Hugh intended to kill him, their conversation reveals that Fitzgerald was the one who decided to abandon him. Hugh forgives the young man and sets out to find and kill Fitzgerald, who had since left the party. For the next 6 months, Hugh wandered from fort to fort, searching for his betrayer, and finally, in June 1824, Hugh Glass walked into Fort Atkinson and finds Fitzgerald. Hugh draws his gun and walks into the fort, but is stopped by a U.S. Army captain. Hugh demands a face-to-face meeting with Fitzgerald so he can give him what he has coming to him, but his long-awaited revenge was immediately crushed. The captain informed Hugh that Fitzgerald had enlisted in the U.S. Army and was now government property. He would not allow Hugh to harm him. Glass pours out his story about how he was abandoned and left for dead by Fitzgerald, and the captain understands how that probably was pretty infuriating, so he tells Hugh to wait a moment. He returns with Hugh's rifle that Fitzgerald had taken and $300. Happy to have his rifle back, but still bummed he couldn't get his revenge, Hugh shouts a warning to Fitzgerald, who remained in hiding. Never leave the army! Because if you do, you'll be dead. Hugh Glass then turns and leaves the fort, returning to life as a fur trapper, which he does for another 10 years until the Arikara finally killed him. Bro really should have retired.
That's it for the video. If you guys want me to post part 2, let me know in the comments and peace.